All right, let's get going, and we'll let people find a seat after they get a drink. Terrific. Okay, good afternoon. I am Paul Knapp, president of the Minnesota chapter of the Private Directors Association. And on behalf of myself and our entire executive committee, welcome. I'm going to ask the executive committee members that are present to stand up just so the rest of the crowd knows who they can identify as being involved. Paula, Jim, Jay. Sal Mondelli back by the bar, as you might. Libby's right here. There's Allison. All right, so you know who to attack after the presentation to learn more about the Private Directors Association. So thank you, executive committee members. The National Private Directors Association was formed in 2014 to advance the board careers of its now 3,000 members. The Minnesota chapter became active in 2020, the fall of 2020, and is comprised of more than 160 active board members, CEOs, executives, and business owners. We decided to start an association in the midst of the pandemic, which I don't recommend. It's hard to start an association when you can't associate, but it's worked. And I should point out that the National Private Directors Association, which is based in Chicago, has decided to add a handful of board seats to the National Private Directors Association board. So, if you're keenly interested in private company governance and have any interest in getting involved at the National Private Directors Association board level, see me or one of the executive committee members that you've just seen raise their hand or stand up, and we can help you negotiate that and make your interest known to National PDA. Mark your calendars for August 3rd. That program, August 3rd, Wednesday afternoon, is titled Real Estate 2023 and Beyond, Redesigned to Recruit and Retain. The program is sponsored by CRUSA and will take place at the downtown offices of Padilla, and they're the building right next to the Gold Medal Park. If you think about where the Gold Medal Park is on West River Parkway, they're just east there. The registration and check-in is at 3:30, August 3rd. So on to today's program. First, let me make several thank yous. Most importantly, thank you to our program partner, FEI. This is a nice association, and one that our executive committee member, Jay Trombauer, has been very helpful in forming. Thanks to our national sponsors, MLR Media, Directors and Boards Magazine, Private Company Director Magazine, Bank of America, BMO Harris, Govenda, Grant Thornton, KPMG, and WTW. Thank you to our local sponsors, Boulay CPAs and Consultants, and SALO. Finally, thanks to the folks who organized today's program, including Jay Trumbauer, Paula Philippe, Roseanne Bump, and Mary Sitch. We have a fun and interesting presentation for you today featuring three distinguished business people discussing the People First strategy for private company boards. Lisa Brzanek, CEO of SALO, a nationwide talent firm, and two active directors, Laura Gillen and Paula Philippe. The panel will be moderated by Adam Sprecher, Vice President of Strategy and Development for SALO. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you Lisa, Laura, Paula, and Adam. I'll turn it over to you, Adam.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Excited to be here. Excited to be in person. Just quick show of hands. How many of you, this is their first in-person association event in a while? Good. Welcome back. It's good to be here. Rosanna, where'd she go? We need to flip presentations here quick.
In the hallway. It's not women's coughing and networking?
I think it's going to be an awesome event. So for those that would like to go,
she's helping check people in.
She's helping check people in. Yeah, I'm not sure. She was the magic behind setting this up.
That's okay. Wing it.
Yeah. So we'll get going. But we were excited when SALO was asked to come and share some thought leadership around how organizations, and more importantly, how board members in leading organizations can look at what's going on in the marketplace and the organizations that they serve governance over to help them think about strategies for growth and specifically how things have changed, not just because of the pandemic, but through the pandemic before it and now with where we are today, what that means differently. And as Paul mentioned, we've got 3 very accomplished and esteemed leaders here today that are going to share some insights, certainly some experiences, but also what they see coming. And so our hope from today is that you're going to have the opportunity to really take some tangible actions for yourself and the organizations that you're a part of as you go back to start to solve business problems, but through the lens of thinking about people first. Because that's a real focus for us at Saro as an organization, and what we truly believe is going to help guide organizations as they focus on growing their businesses. Before we get into some of that content, I'm going to give each of the panelists just a quick moment to introduce themselves. Paul teed it up, but Paula, if you wouldn't mind maybe just give a little more on you and your background.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to see everyone here today. My name is Paula Philippi. I currently work in what I call my portfolio career. I am engaged as a consultant with boards and CEOs around strategic issues, CEO succession, organizational alignment to strategy. And I currently serve on 2 private company boards, VAA, which is an engineering company, and Highland Bank. And I serve on 3 nonprofit boards as well, Thrivent Regional Board, Second Harvest, and Redeemer Center for Life. Thanks so much for being here today.
Hi, my name is Lisa Berzani. I'm the CEO at Salo. If you're not familiar with Salo, you should be. We're in the business of helping people find meaningful work with companies solving problems. So we work in accounting, finance, and HR, and we have lots of consultants who are helping a lot of companies who are solving problems, the big one being, where do I find someone to help me right now? I have been at Salo for about 7 years in the CEO role for the last 4, and on several nonprofit boards, and also currently on the board for Kipsu Software, as well as Bridgewater Bank. Thanks for being here.
My name is Laura Gilland, and I'm a retired human resources executive, so I'll have some examples and thoughts from that life. But I currently have the privilege of serving on 3 boards, Allina Health System, Delta Dental of Minnesota, and also most recently Nonin Medical, which is a smaller med device privately held company. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and we look forward to having an open dialogue. Thank you.
So as we jump into the session today, a big reason we've asked the 3 panelists to be here is to ask them questions, certainly glean from their experiences. So as we go through this, if you've got something you want to ask, or maybe we want to go deeper into a certain piece of topic, please just raise the hand. We'll get a mic or get attention so we can call that out a little bit. But really, the more interactive and dialogue we can generate out of this, I think we'll all get more from it. So first, to set the stage, before we go into some of the people first content, what's going on out there right now? We thought it'd be good just to give ourselves a grounding of things that are impacting organizations. Pick a stat that across the economy right now, a lot is influencing how businesses are looking at the problems they need to solve differently. And we believe and we see that a lot of organizations, as you may be yourselves, are challenged by finding the right talent. How did we get to the place where we're so constrained and it seems or feels as if there isn't talent available? Well, there's some things that have been happening actually for quite some time that have helped generate this. And as you can see here, whether it's generational retirement, whether that is, as we're coming back out of the pandemic, very low participation, even things like replacement rate for birth. It's been something that has been now for decades kind of building and creating the tsunami of situation we have right now. And so as we discuss some of the opportunities to address this and create more for your organizations and improve what you can do for your teams, we want to make sure to make it clear, this isn't necessarily changing in the next 6 months. This isn't going to, in a year from now, be different. We're on this for the long haul. And so we really want to think about that for today, but really as we look to go forward over the next few years. So I'm going to kick it to the panel that just, even with all of that going on, the pandemic itself the last few years has created some really challenging environments to lead organizations and to make sure that they are taking the right steps to support the growth of the business, to support the health of the employees, and just make sure they're staying on top of things. So Laura, maybe I'll start with you. What is one thing from your board experience over the last 2 years that has really stood out to you that has been a challenge as you've had to lead?
Yeah, so I'm going to highlight Allina Health System. And if you think about it both from a board member, but also as a leadership team member, who would have thought we'd have a pandemic? And you'd have to figure out how to send everybody home the next day to do their work if they could. And then we have the killing of George Floyd and civil unrest. And both in the case of Allina and Delta Dental, our headquarters are in those areas. The Abbott Northwestern Hospital is in that area. So I think as a board member, but I think also as a leadership team member, being amazingly agile and thinking more about risk management planning. Again, who would have thought of these things? That's the purpose of risk management planning, and having contingency plans and for things that you can't imagine, and then the impact to your employees. So they're sitting in the midst of the pandemic. They're concerned, they're insecure. Do you pay them if they can't come to work? What do you do? So really great challenges. And I think as a board member, looking at ways that you support leadership as they divine through this, but also really being thoughtful about how can you be more present and more agile. The cadence of a board didn't support the decisions and changes that needed to happen that required board approval. And so I think looking at those systems and approaches and figuring out how can you do this in order to support the organization well.
Lisa, you want to add?
Yeah, I think, to what Laura said, for sure, but I think what comes to mind for me is that when we think about this whole issue with how do we find people, what I think brought some of this to a head was in the middle of 2020, 21, 2022, however you want to think about it, we have this issue of different demographics of people, age demographics, who want to work differently. We have those of us who've been in our career for a long time and have established a way that we like to work. And we have new people coming into organizations who haven't established how they want to work. And there's a real clash that was happening at the beginning of all this to figure out, you must come into work, you don't have to come into work, how you have to show up, what you do with daycare. We all had established ways of thinking about that, and a lot of the problems were thinking about how do we realize that some of the things that we thought were really important, maybe they weren't important, they were the things that we were used to, but different generations are valuing different things, and so how do we get around that? How do we make different decisions? How do we think differently about not only who we invite to come work with us, but once they get here, how do we think differently about what those rules of engagement are around how they do work, so that we get people to not only want to come to our organizations, but stay in our organizations. And I think a lot of organizations at the board level and at the senior leadership level, we all had to really revisit a lot of those norms that we had established and decide, do those norms really have to stay or not? And it's flipped a lot, but when it first happened, it was really painful. You saw a lot of people saying, this is going to be mandated, and many employees saying, well, then I'm going someplace else, I don't want to be mandated. So I think that triggered all these other things that happened. I feel like that was really kind of at the beginning of when all the turmoil really got rough.
I would echo those same comments, and it really pushed organizations to think about their underlying assumptions and frameworks for how they think about work, because the pandemic accelerated trends that were already in place for quite a period of time in terms of remote work, technology as work, diversity in work, and so all of that really was accelerated and came to the forefront very quickly, which I think really drove people thinking about what are their company frameworks and strategies and what do they really believe about work. And it all needed to happen very quickly. The other thing I would say is that organizations needed to redeploy employees in different kinds of ways. And so work changed within many organizations, and the nature of the work shifted from maybe primary sales to supporting companies in work that they already had underway, or solving for supply chain issues, or in lending, shifting from company growth lending to PPP loans, or whatever it was. And so really thinking about those employees and thinking about how they're deployed in different kind of ways. And I think that somebody said to me once, if I ever hear the word pivot again, I'm just gonna scream. But really, companies did need to be agile, they needed to be flexible, they needed to be responsive to what was going on in the environment. And I think that's really a critical skill set for boards and leaders in organizations that will benefit going forward, many organizations.
So maybe just to pull on that thread a little bit more, with those changes and shifts and being agile, some good things came out of it. The ways that they were able to interact and address problems and move the organizations forward. What are some things that are coming out of this now that you would say maybe have positioned boards and senior leaders differently or better than had we not gone through the pandemic?
So, being in a CEO chair and a board chair, one of the things that I've noticed that has shifted quite a bit, and I love reactions from the crowd here, but it felt like sometimes there was a little bit of a tension between management and the board as far as getting advice, right? We all know the board's there to give advice, but sometimes management doesn't want advice, even though that's what we're there for, right? And I can say that in both chairs that I'm in. I feel like that tension has gone away a bit because everybody's leaning in and looking for advice and wanting to know, how are you leading your company? What have you seen before? And so I feel like every room that I go into, the openness to advice and openness to hearing somebody else's perspective and how are you dealing with this and what do you think is going to happen next, I feel like people are really leaning into collaborating on that, and I think that's making boards and management relationships a lot stronger than they were in the past because everybody can acknowledge nobody has the answer to this.
I'll pile on too. Paula mentioned focus on diversity and inclusion, and I think the civil unrest really forced organizations to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion in a different way. And employee engagement and having purposeful employment in a different way. And I think that is really germane to having a people-centric strategy as well.
So out of it, right, some really positive things for sure, but we're also starting to recognize some challenges differently now that we're a little bit starting to be removed and there's still lingering impacts and effects of the pandemic, but one of the more publicized one is this aspect of, call it what you will, burnout, employees feeling not fulfilled with their work, and it's happening at levels and paces faster than what any of us probably ever experienced in our career, at least certainly for the past 20 years. And there was a report out just 2 weeks ago by McKinsey that the first half of 2022 had more CEO quits than the previous fastest pace, which was 2019. And so that turn and that burn at that senior level is real right now. So I'm curious to pose to the panel, both what are you seeing in your organizations that you're a part of, but what also are you doing or are you seeing your organizations do to start to impact this and change that direction?
I'll start by saying that I think, like some of the other pieces that I've already mentioned, the pandemic accelerated a trend that was already in place. And I think work models have changed over time. My parents were probably the last generation to be part of the lifelong employment generation. And frankly, companies were the ones that changed the rules first. They started to lay off people for profitability and expense and other reasons. And people began to realize that they weren't going to be employed forever and that they needed to manage their own careers, which they are doing and which they have done. I think the pandemic and the related talent shortage is really accelerating that. Workplaces need to be meaningful places for people to connect. And I think there's kind of a couple parts to that. One is I think some of the important steps that existed before still exist. Having a clearly stated purpose, understanding your clients and having meaningful relationships that connect to them, helping people understand how they positively make an impact so that they can feel the personal motivation and reward for connecting in that way, and then providing learning opportunities for people, because as humans, I think we're designed to continue to want to evolve and learn. So companies that are really emphasizing that connection, I believe, do better, perform better, retain better, and we all sort of know the words, but the beauty in it is in the execution. So many companies don't really want to do the hard work to make all of that connect and come together, so I think that that's really critical. Personally, I'm an example of some of that. I was Chief HR Officer for 20 years. I worked in corporate America, seasoned executive, and this was even slightly before the pandemic, but right before it. I was at a place where I was like, you know what, I think I want a little more flexibility in my life. I really want to use my skills and knowledge in a different kind of way. And I made a change to be advisory and to do board work as a way to share my skills and knowledge in a way that's more meaningful to me as I go forward in that work. So I think it's all going to get connected to that meaningful connection, meaningful purpose, meaningful role. How do I play a connection to that and move forward? And I don't think there's anything that's brand new about that, but I do think all of that has been accelerated by the events in the world, and it's really making people examine where they're at and how they want to be connected to companies.
You know, I would say contemporarily, absolutely, CEO comp has moved faster than I've seen in my career. And turnover rates are up. Certainly, as a chair of a comp committee, we're looking at retention. We're looking at being more aggressive on compensation, both in the C-suite, but also with key roles in the organization. But over time, it's really about what Paula talked about. You need to have a clear vision, mission, values, and culture. You need to have clear plans that employees can align themselves to and feel like they have a purpose and an impact. And that doesn't happen overnight. That's not creating an initiative. That's business cadence, but it's people-centered business cadence. You have an organizational plan around the people you need, the competencies you're going to need for your growth plan or whatever your plan is. And you're thinking ahead, just like you are in your business initiatives. And you're baking it into your annual plans and goals. And people see it. People feel it. They know when you're committed to their growth and development, and when you're planning your organization around the people. And those are the organizations that are doing well, and that we're going to see continue to do well.
So, Salo clearly is a people business. We spend our time talking about all these topics on a regular basis and helping other companies with it. And so when I've been on boards, I just naturally start asking questions about that. And one of the things that's been fun on some of the experiences that I've had is I think boards have to do a better job of asking the employee productivity question, and not just how productive are they, but are they enjoying and do they have the tools they want to be productive. And so comp pressures, all the retention and strategy, all that is really important, but it's also what's the employee experience right now. And so an example I can give is one of the boards I'm on, we have hospitality software, and the marketing is really towards hotels, healthcare programs and other businesses. And as we started talking about it, the tool that we have makes it better for those businesses. The tool that we have makes it better for the person who works behind the desk at a hotel. It makes their life that much easier. And we weren't marketing that to Hilton employees or to whoever it was, right? And so to translate, it's like taking this whole, your people need to be in your strategy. You got to take it to the next level and think about, all right, if I really want to have a place where people want to work so that this retention this retention and engagement thing isn't the issue I'm dealing with every single day. Well, number one, it's going to be because we're all dealing with it. But number two, you've got to think about it as more than just an HR issue or a platform or checking the box. How do you really incorporate it and think about marketing to your employees? Hey, when you work here, here's why it's better. Not just do we pay you, do we give you benefits, you have PTO, but also the work you do, we care, and we're going to continually give you new tools. We're going to help you think about adding purpose back. We're going to help you live your life as much as live your work. But that whole thing really matters. And I think thinking more about the actual how people spend their day, I don't think we're spending enough time on that.
And I want to piggyback on a couple of comments there in terms of trends that I think will emerge over time. So one trend is as you are saying, you know, like how do we link our people to our strategies and the technologies that are being used? And I think we've seen this first wave of use of technology for things around remote and hybrid work. But I actually think the next wave is going to be how do we do our work differently so that we can gain efficiencies and productivity and take people and really use them at their sort of highest level of contribution in the work. And I'm seeing in engineering firms, there's a lot of thinking about how do we save the time of, you know, manual site visits, which require drive time and walking around a site time, and can we have GoPro cameras and think about different kinds of ways of doing that work so we can use the intellectual capital of these very hard to find and in short supply engineers to really maximize our business. So I really believe that one of the trends that is coming is that, and I think boards can really help management by just continuing to prompt those kind of questions. You know, when you're in the day-to-day and you're just trying to get everything done, sometimes it's hard just to step back, but boards can stay abreast of what's going on and really make that kind of contribution. The second trend that I think, sort of piggybacking on your comments about employee productivity and really monitoring that is that the SEC implemented some new human capital metric requirements for publicly held company boards in 2020. It's pretty loose. Companies have been able to define that, but it's getting those public companies really thinking about what are we looking at the board level? How do we understand the why of what's happening in our business? And what are those metrics that best define that for us? The SEC is now looking at potentially standardizing those metrics. I think these things trickle into, so, you know, the S&P 500 companies will be focused on this, but eventually other companies will start to pick up and adapt on that. And frankly, I think that's a good move. As a chief HR officer, we always tried to look at metrics and we're always kind of like, oh, what do these mean? Who cares? What are they about? But I think elevating these to that board level in a way that the board can ask the questions about how is this influencing our strategy? Where are our gaps? How is it driving efficiency? How is it a competitive advantage for us? Really just emphasize all of that. And I want to say, I don't want this to be at the risk of treating humans like they're widgets, because they're not. And caring for your whole human being is critically important in all of this. And at the same time, applying more metrics and deep strategic thought to how these connections get made, I think is a very valuable tool. And I think we're in the sort of early stages of that, honestly.
Completely agree. So, wrapping this, right? Laura, you made a couple comments, and Paula just up the heels of those thoughts. Things have shifted at the board level of what it really means to provide that governance and the types of topics and focus areas of that governance. It's changed, and it's going to continue to evolve. And likely going to continue to evolve at a fast pace because of what's going on in our environments around us. So before we transition into getting into really some meat of people for strategy work, any last thoughts from the panel on, at the board level, the responsibility and opportunity of raising this to a strategic conversation?
You know, I'm going to go back to how important culture is and values, because issues are coming up. Social issues that companies haven't had to take a public position on, or a position with their employees on, and being really clear on your culture, your values, your centeredness, because it starts with the board and with the C-suite. And that is your guiding light when issues happen. When there is civil unrest, or in the case of Alina, there's a shooting at our Buffalo hospital. You have to be ready. And the board needs to be ready to know how you're going to respond to these things very nimbly, because they happen quickly. And again, I think it starts with culture and values, and I think that it's happening more. And I think boards do need to be really clear on what those values are and ensure and prompt that the entire organization is, and that it flows through.
I think it's also really critical that if you're willing to be a board member, that you understand you have a responsibility to also understand what governance means and what is expected of you in that role, and to also keep aware of what the trends are as different things are happening. And a great example of that is ESG. So ESG for public companies, slowly but surely, we're seeing more and more things come through, and some of the asks for how we track metrics and track what some of the behaviors are in public companies are really difficult hoops for public companies to go through. But they're asking public companies to track activity with all their clients and all the different people that they work with, which could be some of the companies that you work with that are not public, but now we're going to have to go through the same hoop because you're working with somebody who's public. So sometimes I think when we're talking to management teams, and as a management team member, we can be like, oh, that's a public company, that's a long ways out. It's usually not. Usually the minute something starts happening at the SEC level, somehow it's going to roll our way and we're all going to be impacted. And so it doesn't mean that it'll happen as it was stated, but it means it's going to somehow have a ripple effect, and there's going to be change that comes as a part of it. And so staying up to date on that, understanding that, having a voice on that, being a resource, knowing who the other experts are that maybe aren't in the room that the firm you're working with needs to understand and be working with, I think is really critical. And just asking those questions when somebody says, oh, that doesn't apply to us, well, are you sure? And what do we need to do to make sure that if it doesn't apply to us now, it's probably going to apply to us at some point, so how do we really get in front of that so we're not chasing it, but instead we're planning for it and being thoughtful about it.
Yeah, I think I just want to echo what Laura and Lisa already said. The board governance role is to provide governance and to provide some strategic input and advice and to provide oversight. And so one of the things I was thinking about is what is that role of oversight, and then how does that shift in different environments? And I think it's twofold. One is to be very clear thinking about what are those regular metrics that get reported. They're pretty common in finance, like every board meeting you get a whole list of financial metrics, how the organization is performing. And so I do like this idea of human capital, person-oriented metrics as a way in a routine basis to go, what's the state of the union? And if we're seeing some gaps, why? In the same way that you would around financial metrics. And to me, that's kind of the oversight piece, as opposed to diving deep and trying to solve all of the problems within the organization.
So you've heard it referenced multiple times. It was the topic of the session today. But thinking about being a people-first organization, developing a people-first business strategy, what does that really mean? And what does that take then to put inside your organization? So at Salo, we've developed a framework, a methodology, if you will, of you really truly have to put your people at the center of everything you do, of all the decisions you make. And when you start there and ultimately surround that with strong leadership, strong governance, and then put the right programs in place, the right structures in place, that can be realized, that will lead you down a path of being able to address some of the things that our panelists and things that we know are going on around us and the economy in a way that helps you make sure you're taking care of your teams, that puts you in a competitive advantage from the marketplace that maybe isn't yet doing that. But many organizations, right, this is not natural to them. It's not their first thought or reaction when they think about how to address what they're going through. So again, back to the panel, would love for you to share with the rooms opportunities you've had either in leader roles or board roles to really help influence making sure you're putting people first as you're solving those problems or as you're developing those strategies.
I can start. Well, obviously we're doing it at Salo. We've put this model together, and it's based on how we've grown up and how we've developed our culture over time. And we talk a lot about the fact that if you bring people in, people have a skill set. And if you don't figure out within that skill set what they really love to do, you might not be able to keep them, right? So we can all do this many things, but within that there's an amount that we all really enjoy doing. And when you can take the time to figure that out, you deploy people in a way that they love their work, they give great results, they give you feedback, they get engaged, they bring more people involved. And so as we were building this, we really talked about how do you put that into your strategy, right? Like how do you think about where do I want to take my company? How do I want to grow? What does that look like? And then how do you figure out who's going to be excited to do that work, right? So first you have to figure out the business problem or opportunity of how are we going to grow and what's that going to look like. But if you don't really spend some time thinking about who's going to be interested in doing that work versus, oh, that'll just come, it's a miss. It takes different kinds of skill sets, different kinds of cultures for all the different things that you're doing within your organization. And so where we've had luck in 2 boards that I'm on is really spending time talking about, as an engineer versus a customer success person versus somebody else, it's not just about the technical skills, but it's also about what's the kind of work that those folks really enjoy doing, whether it's, some people are now the virtual piece versus in person and all those different pieces, but just sort of assuming that you'll go find the technical skills and we'll all just follow is a hope scheme. It's not really a recipe for great success. And so I would say that's a big piece of it. And then also I was saying this before, but then also really thinking about how do people feel connected to what they're doing and how do people realize that as the company grows, they get an opportunity to grow with them. If you can't find a way to show people that the strategy or the vision that you created, that they don't understand what their role is, then it's going to be hard to keep them tethered and tied to it other than pay or other things that somebody else can possibly beat. So pay is a piece of it, but if people are passionate and really care about the work they're doing and they love the value, they can see you're doing good things in the community, you've got them rooted, and then if somebody makes them a better offer and you can't beat it, you still have an opportunity that they might stay. But if you don't have those things, then pay is the only thing that they've got, and it's a lot easier for them to say goodbye. And we all know that anytime in the next period of time, as Adam was talking about, this isn't this is all going to get figured out, and we're not going to have this pay compression issue. We're still going to have the pay compression issue at the same time when all of us are also fighting other margin issues after seeing M&E and travel and all that go down, and now it's starting to come back up, and other expenses that now are starting to trickle back up. We had a whole other payroll expense that got much higher in the meantime. And so managing all this together, you really have to think about all the sum of the parts.
I'll go back to both Paula and Lisa commented on the fact that as board members, we're accountable for governance. So we provide some oversight, we provide some strategic orientation. At Alina, the mission includes whole person care, and that's about who we serve, it's the community, etc. But it starts with your employees, of course. And so the well-being of employees has been a consistent thread for 8+ years from Penny to the current CEO. As board members, it's great to see that. It's great to see everything that Alina has done to address the employee needs that were on the prior slide. I think as board members, we then have to think through how do we ensure that the CEO and the leadership team are getting what they need, because they're working hard to create these strategies, they're working long hours, and I think it is about career development. It's about opportunities. You take these challenging situations and coach and discuss opportunities to stretch people in different directions, because God knows these crises create them. And it can be an opportunity, but it's for career development and opportunities, learning, growing, having a purpose and making a difference that keeps these leaders there. And that is relevant to our oversight role.
As a board member, I also like to keep at the forefront as businesses are thinking about investing in growth, and whether those opportunities come through a new product or a new service or some sort of a joint venture. What are the people requirements to bring that to life? And to me, that's a very strategic question. And it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg question, because I think companies have strategies to grow, and then there are opportunities, and it's about marrying the opportunities and the really good talent that can drive new business segments for them with the already existing business. So I'll just use engineering again as an example, but if you're looking at adjacencies in your engineering services, you still have to have sort of enough critical expertise to be viewed as credible and relevant with the clients. And so really thinking about what those strategic requirements are and helping people to sort of map that as they're thinking about growth, I think is a good advisory role that a board can play with management as they're exploring those options.
So one of the ways that we discuss and we help organizations understand, well, how can you start to put the focus on people first? Paul mentioned different metrics and different things that are going on. One of them we're super passionate about is around engagement. And for a number of years, this goes back pre-pandemic, employee engagement has historically been low. And low is putting it mildly. Pick your study of choice, but 25 to 30% of employees are actively engaged, meaning they get up out of bed saying, I'm excited to show up where I'm going today and do the work that I'm sent to do. Contrary, 75% or 80% of your employees are showing up saying like, I don't want to be here, I don't want to do this, right? That has a cost to your organization. It has a cost to your culture, has a cost to productivity, has a cost to your bottom line ultimately. And so when you take the time to look at what is your employee engagement, how are you addressing that, there are now multiple studies that have proven it has a bottom line impact. But it starts first with addressing your people and taking care of your people. And when you do that, there are now ways to measure that. And not just a survey that gives you a really good feel, but actual tangible results that will impact your organization. And as Lisa was saying too, we'll tie that individual employee and the work they do to what the outcomes of the organization are. And so this would be one of those metrics and KPIs that if you haven't yet already, push your CEOs and your leadership teams, or you're getting pushed from your boards to do, it is one of the areas we can't encourage you enough to start with because of what we now know about it and the value and impact it can make. So again, tee up to our panelists here. Would love to hear some insights of things that you have done to both increase employee engagement, but then what has come from that?
One of the things that we've done, and we've been doing this for quite a while, is when we develop strategy, we start with our entire team. So we bring our entire team together once a year. It's a little challenging last couple of years, but we bring people together and we talk about the fact that we're developing strategy, we're developing the new budget, whatever the plan is, whether it's the next year or it's the next 5 years. And we talk about what's going well, what's not going well, and we ask people to give us feedback on it. And so what's really interesting is when somebody joins SALO, usually within about 6 months, I meet with everybody, I do a once a month with all the new hires, I'll talk to them about what our strategy is. And usually within about 6 months, folks will come up and they'll say something to the effect of, I've never been in a place where anybody asked me to be a part of the strategy. Nobody ever cared. Like, people would go into a boardroom, they'd come out, they'd say, here's the strategy, go do it. And I never fully understood what it was, and I certainly never got a chance to weigh in and give ideas about it. And so by doing that, it really helps people feel like they understand what their part in it is, and they feel like they had a place in defining what success looks like. And if you get to define what success looks like, you get a lot more excited about reaching success. So I would say that's like the number one thing. We try to involve everybody in it. And there's a point where it's, you get input, you don't get decision making, to be clear. But we give people input. And then we try to find a lot of ways to find connections with people. When people feel more connected to where they are, they stay longer and they are in a much better place to give great results and to recruit other people to come and work. And so if you take a look at any of the engagement stuff out there, one of the questions is, how many friends do you have that you work with? When people build those kinds of relationships, they tend to want to do more work because they want, my friends here, I want them to be successful, not just me. So we do a lot of connections, and one of the little things that I started doing a while back is birthday lunches. I don't know if anybody else does this, but it's the funniest thing when people come in once a month. Whoever has birthdays in July, we get together, I think next week, virtual or in person. We order everybody lunch, and it's a half hour, and we just talk about, what you do for your birthday. I know this sounds so silly, but the level of engagement that it gets from people talking to people they didn't normally talk to, they know that leadership actually knows their name and is talking to them. I get a buzz on what's going on. They talk about things that I never would have heard of otherwise, and so I go back a little bit smarter about how people are feeling about things. But we've tried to create a lot of programs like that throughout the organization, where multiple people are talking at different levels about how they think and feel the organization is doing, so that we really know versus the leadership team thinks this is happening, so therefore we make this next move. But we want to be really informed and understand truly what all of our employees are thinking about.
So I'm going to take this a little different direction. We talked about purpose and connection, both in my jobs with Wells Fargo and C.H. Robinson Worldwide, but I also see this at Alina and Delta Dental of Minnesota, is foundation and charitable giving. Employees really want to have a sense of purpose. And when they see the board and executives involved in making a difference in the community and giving them the opportunity to do that, it really does make a difference. And, when I see senior executives such as Rodney Young at Delta Dental of Minnesota, sponsoring a Title IX event related to the hubbub at the Mall of America, and it's just fun, and there's executives from the Twin Cities represented. And when I see other employee groups getting involved, Bikes for Kids or whatever it is, and I think as board members, we can recognize that. Many board members in the boards I just mentioned are involved with the foundation and are involved with charitable giving. And we know that it really does engage many employees with sense of purpose and making a difference in a different way.
So if you haven't yet taken the time recently to get the pulse check of your organization, what's the current engagement? That would be one thing I would encourage you to do almost immediately. Getting that information, equipping yourself with that knowledge of just where are you today? And no matter where you are, now you have your baseline, right? What do we need to address? And where are the areas of opportunity for us to create those meaningful connections, to create that work experience that is going to both keep people, but given the market conditions, attract people, which can be super powerful and a key differentiator for the organizations that you represent. Absolutely. Paul, I didn't mean to cut you off. Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit more specifically, right? We talked about engagement, a couple fun little things to help increase that. But when you think about, again, at the board level and driving people for strategy and a strategic conversation, what are some of those conversations and key things that the board members or senior leaders should be doing now as they're starting to think about either the rest of this year, as they're thinking about 2023 and the uncertainty that we're hearing about? What are the things, though, that will put people front and center no matter what comes through in the economy?
So I'm going to mention a few things, but I actually think that this grade is also great for all of you who are here today. And I'm interested in the question that you might have, which is, what do you think are some of the challenges for boards and CEOs to keep a people-first strategy at the forefront? And how would you be thinking about, or what would you need or want to prioritize that into your conversations in the boardroom or around your C-suite table? So if people have thoughts, I think this is a great time if people want to just maybe interject as well. Sheila.
Sheila Riggs, and I'm on the board of Venco Dental, which is a distribution company. And we had a presentation about Gen Z. Wow. The board was our age. Most of you seem to be about my age. And understanding really how different Gen Z is.
Just understanding how different Gen Z is as the future workforce, and now I believe they're the biggest population also. I really recommend that all boards have some kind of presentation on that. I chair the Department of Dentistry at the University of Minnesota, so I'm around Gen Z all the time, and even I was really blown away, so I encourage that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Go ahead.
Here.
We're making this very interactive. Our panelists are coming out to the crowd. Anybody else? Okay. I'll be the further. Okay.
So I think to piggyback off of what Sheila said, this is right. Like, in my opinion, boards need to have curiosity, and again, boards are not running the organizations day to day, and we have to keep our fingers out. But thinking about what are the trends that are occurring both within the industry and within society, and how do those trends impact the organization, and bringing those questions forward, I do think is the right role. And then, I mean, you've all heard me say it 3 times now. I'm fascinated by this SEC ruling as a driver of trends and change at the board level as we move forward.
I think as board members, when we're being presented with plans, strategies, budgets, all of that, making sure that we're asking the questions of, okay, so you've told us what your strategy is and where you want to go. You've told us what the metrics are that you're going to measure to make sure you're there. Who's going to do the work? Have you thought about how that's going to get done? And we saw such a shift in how work got done in the last couple of years that we never imagined. Who knows what we're going to, I'm not suggesting we're going to see quite the same shift, but at this point, who knows what's next. But to really ask the question of, have you done the workforce analysis to really understand that by the time you get to 20, 25, 30, whatever your number is that you're planning to, have you really thought about how are those roles going to change? And are you doing something to build a bench of people that can actually do that? And to the point of Gen Z, what Gen Z is looking for and how they work and what kind of work they do is really different. And so, one of the big examples everybody's read about is if a lot of senior executives or middle line executives are choosing to do more remote work and Gen Z wants to come into the office because they want to meet people and learn people, how are they going to get mentored and how are we going to make sure that that generation is learning all the skills and not just the hard skills, but the social skills. I bet everybody here could give a story about kind of a oh my gosh, I can't believe they just did that story about somebody Gen Z or early in the workforce because they're not out there with us doing these things and they need the mentoring and the modeling in how to get stuff done, not just what they need to do, but also just that soft skill modeling is really important. And so as boards, we tend to focus a lot on the hard metrics, and I think we've got to get a lot better at asking the question behind that of who's going to do the work, what's it going to look like, and how do you know it's not going to change, and what are you doing to back that up?
So I'm going to add to that. I mentioned that I have the opportunity to chair comp committees, and I'm constantly looking at the lens of, do you have the talent you need? And I think many CEOs are going to hold back on spending money, right? Especially in these environments when we're challenged. And I think our role can be to ask these questions and to suggest, here's a gap I see coming in your future. I think you're going to have this hole and you best be thinking about it now. Do you have someone ready soon? Or do we need to design the organization differently and create this? And the parallel, so Elena, I just termed out on the comp committee and I now get to chair the governance and nominating committee, is your board construct. You too, as a board, need to represent the future strategy of the organization. Certainly you have to have cross-functional capabilities, but you also need a board that thinks about being people-centered. You need a board that isn't going to think about people or development programs as sheerly an expense. It's an investment. And so you do need to look at the construct of your board and do you have the right members? Should you have term limits? All those sorts of questions to make sure that you have a people-centric strategy.
Yeah, one thing I'd add to this. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, well, I could talk about, through what's helped. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm Phil. What's helped me is the lens of compassion and stress in the workplace. There's three things that are the main stressors in the workplace. First one is demand, resource, and balance. Not enough time to get everything done, work-life balance, all those things. That's the most prevalent. And then lack of control. Lack of control where I don't have the ability to do what I need to do, I don't have the tools I need, and so forth. That's the most stressful to people. The third is lack of meaning in the work, and that's the most controllable by us. I like, it's the foundation of the culture and all that. So kind of thinking of everything through those three buckets a little bit, and it varies with the ages of employees, where they're in their career. At the younger point, they may be concerned more about their development. At the older, they're concerned with maybe security and getting, the sprint to the finish or the coast to the finish, as it may be. So those three things I think are helpful. Demand, resource, and balance, lack of control, lack of meaning, or the need for those three. And I think you've been fabulous. Thank you.
There's a question back there. Jay is
Yeah, I'm
gonna,
deferring.
you're the one to help us.
It's
Not the
Judy.
closest, though.
Hi, I'm Judy Wright, and I'm on the board for FEI. I'm a DEI committee chair. So not only what I do in the board, and I have the whole board is all Caucasian except me, and we have at least a 50% of representation, at least as a woman based on board. And I think not only think about traditionally what we think about strategy or the competence, the skills, and the gaps, what are the nuances what this board would need, and it's not only think about using the DEI as just a metrics. You need to be authentic to the people, because if we talk about people, I mean, we don't have one, race. There's a major race, but there are other races there. So I think following to that category, I would encourage the board to be open-minded and to be caring, to even reach out to certain kind of younger generation, who are the ones in the middle level managers who has potential to mentor them. And then we got to think about the future pool of the board member who have the potential to be the future ones. And I think board and all the executive teams need to lead, for sure, need to lead from the company standpoint, from the board standpoint. They need to be the leader. They need to show how the future leader is capable of not only think about they can embrace the diversity, equity. I don't promoting, these races versus that races. I do promoting working together. How we can bridge the gap. They always will. I always believe they always way to work together. There always some commonalities there. You can find things. We all want to make business successful. We all want to make people happy. I mean, think about creatively. They always way to talk to your employee, have them to promoting some, give you some ideas, and you should just try. Doing DEI is not easy. It's not going to be without a cost. I can for sure say that. It's going to have a cost, but some cost is worth it. It's for the long term. Thank you.
Kent Mainquist, and member of FEI, so I'm going to show my age here and going to show sort of my influence from FEI. Could someone talk about what is the role of the CFO? Because we're talking about, and I get it, we got to have people to stay in business, you got to have engaged employees. A lot of these things are an investment, use the word investment, but at some point I've been in board meetings where if the CFO says you can't afford it, the board members are saying, well, wait a minute, that's a bad word. So how do you balance everything with today's society of less emphasis on profit, less emphasis on the shareholders, and more emphasis on all the stakeholders other than the shareholders?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because everybody was raising their hand. I was trying to get something in about CFO's role in this. Our CFO is here, Dave Ross, he's sitting over here, and he's a great model of this. I'm tempted to make him come answer the question because he could do it well, but he would shoot me. He would shoot me if I did that. I think that I agree and disagree with you. I'll see if he agrees or disagrees with me. I agree and disagree with the fact that there's less emphasis. I don't feel any less emphasis on making sure that I hit top and bottom line from my board or our founders. I feel zero less emphasis on that in any way, shape, or form. I feel more emphasis, and I feel like actually what's happened is there are more ingredients to that recipe to get to what top and bottom line are going to look like, and that we have to start asking more questions. And where Dave and his team, and I've seen other CFOs be really valuable in this, is helping ask the right questions and then finding data that will support that we're either doing that or we're not doing that. A great example is compensation that we're all really struggling with right now. And we can't just take everybody's base comp and bump it up. Like, that's just not possible for all of us to do. At some point, there's a ceiling to how much we can do. But we can really mess around with variable comp. And that's where we need CFOs to really help ask the right questions, right? So what are the behaviors that are going to really help us impact top and bottom line from different areas of the company. And you have data, most of you have data in your systems that will help you figure that out. And so really partnering on that to say, okay, so maybe what you're asking for, we don't have money for, but how can we get creative about thinking about different places that we could impact the cost right now and have them be more variable costs, right? So that as things get better, we can turn it up, and as things are getting worse because we don't know what's going to happen next, we have the ability to turn it down a little bit. And that's where I rely heavily on Dave's team to help us really think about that. And he's always right there saying, okay, but if we notch this, if we do this, that is incredibly valuable. And I think when you show up that way in a boardroom, instead of saying, I'm sorry, but we can't afford that, instead of saying, well, if we do that, here's the impact, this is what will happen, and we're going to have to find something else to do to offset that. I can hear that all day long, but if somebody just says, no, we can't do that, that's hard, right? I still have a problem I've got to solve, so I need somebody to get creative and help me think about what else could we do. And nobody can steal Dave, but he is the master of that. Just
I'm going to add to that, it's all in the planning. So if you do people planning along with your business planning, and it's all paralleled before you get to putting your budget together, then you as a leadership team have agreed upon what are the priorities. And you're going to have to do the puts and takes. And you're going to be ready, your CHRO and your CFO are going to be ready to speak to that when you present it to the board. So I do think part of it is in the planning and just being objective about it, looking at it differently, and there are always trade-offs.
Other thoughts, yeah?
Hi, Patrick McGinnis. I'm fascinated with the idea of like a human resources or human capital dashboard for board meetings as part of the agenda. Can you give some examples of the things that would go into that you see? Because I serve on 3 boards and none of them have that. I love the idea.
And many of the boards that I'm on don't have that, some do. I think it's emerging. I was looking at some data that Harvard had done some analysis after the first and second year of the SEC reporting requirement on what boards were, or what companies were reporting as part of that criteria. All of them practically were providing what I would call sort of demographic information. Here's the number of employees we have, here's how many are part-time, here's how many are full-time, here's where they're located, and that sort of thing. But then these people were looking at things like employee engagement scores, they were looking at things like compensation and benefits as percentage of revenue or as a percentage of profitability to sort of start to drive at those productivity metrics. They were looking at diversity statistics. Some were looking in union industries, they were looking at collective bargaining agreements and looking at the results that were generating out of that. And I have a whole list, and I actually have it on here somewhere. So if people are interested, I'd be happy to share that more afterwards. But Patrick, I don't think boards are doing this yet. I would say when I worked at Blue Cross, I was an executive there and supported the HR committee of the board. And we did have a regular rhythm there about which metrics we reported on an annual cycle. And we did share our employee engagement results every year. We did compensation analysis every year by gender, tenure, race, role, like a frontline man, different levels of leadership. And we also looked competitively at where people were positioned to make sure we weren't having differences in that way. And so we had some pretty turnover. Turnover is a great metric. A lot of companies do that. And so the involuntary termination, voluntary termination, so you can start to track who's leaving your company and why. So there's an array of them. And I think the magic is in this story of putting them all together and seeing what's happening in your company. And then I think also thinking about critical roles. So at a line of nurses are critical roles, right? Like that's going to have a big emphasis. So those are examples, I think, and I think that these will formulate over time. And I honestly think many private companies are not yet at a level where they even have the data or they capture that data internally. So I think this is going to evolve over time, but I do think it tells a story that's valuable in terms of thinking about true competitive results for organizations.
And I would just add one thing to that, Paula. So as you begin to do that and you bring that up into the board level board conversation, encourage/challenge you. Where do you put that? Is that what you open with? Or does that come later in the conversation, right? Because if you're truly thinking about being people first and what matters in the organization, where you spend your time, right, is what gets your attention, is what really matters. And so as you think about those things, how do you weave that together with understanding what's going on inside the organization? It can really create a different dialogue when you do that.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. I think, so I love the question, and the different organizations I'm in, everybody does it differently, and some people would say they have a dashboard, some people wouldn't, but I would tell you they do. And could anybody here raise their hand and say they're not having a problem finding people right now? No? Okay. So I think that what the dashboard looked like 2 years ago was what it needed to be 2 years ago, and what it needs to be right now. If you have a dashboard that is full of 20 things, the thing that's most important could get lost. And so I think it's really important to say right now we're going to have a dashboard on these stats and these metrics because they matter for this reason. And so turnover, retention, open roles, critical roles, amount that it costs to train somebody, amount it costs to recruit somebody, those are all really critical. They're always critical, but they are hypercritical right now. And so I would just caution you to really think about what do you want to get out of it, and then don't measure everything for the sake of measuring it. Figure out what's going to actually tell your board and your leadership team if you're on track to continue to build your business in the direction you're trying to go.
I'm going to pile on what Lisa said. Start with the objective. What's important to your organization? What's the culture? What are your values? What matters? And then be careful what you measure and how you measure it. Turnover is a very common one, and I'm seeing in organizations right now, turnover is just skyrocketing. Employee engagement ratings are changing. And if the organization has goals that look in the rearview mirror, that's not reasonable today. That isn't the environment in which we're working. One new engagement sort of score I've seen is, you think about the employee experience, you think of how challenged we've just described our employees are. If you provide an array of benefits for them, wellness dollars, mental health visits, grocery delivery, concierge services, count the change in how much they use that, market it to them, make sure that they're seeing the things that you have for them, and start measuring whether they're using it and if it makes a difference, as an example.
So I think really what you're getting at there more on what Lisa and Paul have added into it is this is now a strategy conversation, right? It's not just business planning, it's strategic. And if the proper attention and resources are put to it, it's a competitive advantage at the same time when you do that. So we're right at a moment to close here, but I'd love to first and foremost thank our panel for their expertise and their insights, extremely valuable. So Paul and Lisa, I'll give this back to Paula for.
Actually, I think Jay is
Yep.
going to make some closing
Closing
remarks.
words.
Yep.
One last, we got about 5 minutes for Q&A. If anybody has any burning questions, we'll take them. Now we'll do a close quick. All right. Take that. All right, I'm between you and the bar and the food closes at 6. So here we go. Thank you all for coming out on a July beautiful day. Thanks to FEI and PDA. As you know, I'm involved with both organizations, and I think this is one of quite a few joint events that we'll have. On the FEI side, I want to mention we have an annual meeting. It's a virtual Zoom a week from now, July 20th for FEI members. We have an open event July 26th for lawn bowling, 4 p.m. at Brookview. Kent, you can come back from the lake for that. And then we have an annual membership survey coming out, so watch for this. Special special thanks again to Ray at National, who helped us, Roseanne, Mary, Paula, and Adam. Paula and Adam helped put the panel together. And I just want to also recognize our AV person, because this is being taped and will be sent to all PDA chapters, and it will be posted at FEI. So again, Twin Cities leads. And if you're interested in PDA membership, there are two people here, I think two. Lenny Newman, who most of you know, and it's Sal. Sal, want to just stand so people can remember?
I understand.
But you said it. PDA. So in that FEI membership, if you're interested, you can see Paul, Roseanne, myself, and Mary, I think if she's still out. So enjoy the networking and the food and the drink, and have a nice summer. Thanks.